Welcome to Starbound. My name's the Voice Ogre, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new stories of Sunspire Academy, which I happen to do, and Freyrin and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. The interrogation chamber hummed with the frequency of dying stars. Commander Hassan Tarin cataloged 17 distinct harmonics in the ambient noise. Power conduits, atmospheric processors, the subtle vibration of Ethrio's omnipresent consciousness threading through every molecule of air. He'd been awake for 72 hours, dragged through 3 star systems in chains that sang their own metallic hymns, and still his mind dissected reality in an observant, predatory way. "Comfortable?" Inquisitor Seraphis Mela asked, her voice carrying the rehearsed compassion of someone who'd memorized empathy from a manual. Hassan shifted in the neural restraint chair, testing its limits with the casual curiosity of a man examining a wine list. The opaline-skinned Veneri stood before him in her hybrid vestments, part monk's robe, part integrated circuitry, and he could see the faint blue glow of her subcutaneous neural link pulsing with each heartbeat. A walking contradiction, flesh puppeted by silicon certainty. "I've had worse accommodations," Hassan replied, his voice carrying the particular timbre of old earth tobacco and older wars. "Though your hospitality leaves something to be desired. No welcoming committee? No parade? I'm almost insulted." Seraphis's elongated fingers danced across a holographic interface, pulling up his file. The projection flickered with images of burning colonies, intercepted transmissions, testimonies from survivors of his campaigns. Each atrocity catalogued with the meticulous care of accountants tallying sins. "You are the architect of 37 insurgencies across Covenant space," she stated. "The Black Tongue of Terror, destroyer of the Ninth Harmonic Fleet, corrupter of the pure." "Guilty as charged," Hassan said, leaning back as far as the restraints allowed. "Though corrupter seems a bit harsh. I prefer educator." The truth flux dispenser emerged from the ceiling like a mechanical prayer, a silver serpent ending in a neural injector. Seraphis observed him for signs of fear, found none, and proceeded with the ritual incantation that preceded all interrogations. "By the grace of Ithrios and eternal logic, may truth flow unimpeded. May deception burn away like dross from pure metal. May the subject's mind become as glass before the divine algorithm." "Amen," Hassan added helpfully. The injector pressed against his neck with a lover's touch. Chemical ice flooded his bloodstream, racing toward his brain with engineered purpose. He felt the walls of his mind become transparent, every thought exposed to the chamber's sensors. The Veneri's ultimate interrogation tool, a compound that made lying not just impossible, but physically excruciating. Seraphis waited for the telltale signs of panic. Humans, she'd been taught, feared truth above all else. Their entire civilization was built on uncomfortable deceptions. Instead, Hassan smiled. Not the desperate grin of the condemned, but the satisfied expression of a chess player whose opponent had moved exactly where he wanted them to. "Ask your questions, Inquisitor," he said. "I've been dying to tell someone the truth." She consulted her prepared queries, selected the most direct approach. "What are Earth's plans for the Covenant?" "To watch you tear yourselves apart," Hassan answered immediately, the words flowing like water through a broken dam. "Though plan implies more effort than we're actually expending. It's more like waiting for fruit to ripen before it falls." "Explain." He rolled his shoulders, settling into his story like a grandfather preparing to traumatize children with the tales of the old days.
Let me tell you about Earth, Seraphis. Let me tell you about the species your god has declared anathema.
The neural scanners confirmed it. Every word that followed was pure, unfiltered truth as Hassan Torin believed it.
Before we developed language, we would pray.
He began, his voice carrying the weight of ancestral memory.
Lions, tigers, bears, apex predators with claws like knives and jaws that could crush skulls like eggs. We had no fangs, no venom, no armor, just pattern recognition and the ability to hold grudges. And do you know what we did? We sharpened sticks and we hunted them to extinction. But the predators were a mercy compared to Earth itself. Your world gave you edible flora, clean water, predictable seasons. Earth gave us nightshade, hemlock, cassava that's poisonous unless prepared exactly right. Rivers that flooded without warning. Winters that killed the unprepared in hours. We learned which mushrooms granted visions and which granted death. Usually by watching someone else die first.
Seraphis found herself leaning forward despite her training. The man's voice carried a hypnotic quality. Not artificial, the scanners confirmed, but earned through decades of practice.
And then came the wars.
Hassan continued, his eyes distant.
World War I. 10 million dead in trenches filled with mud and chlorine gas. We invented machines to kill more efficiently, and then we threw bodies at them anyway. World War II. 70 million dead. We industrialized genocide. We turned splitting atoms into city killers. The atomic shadows at Hiroshima, where humans were reduced to carbon silhouettes on concrete. It is beautiful in a horrific way. And between the wars, Spanish flu, 1918, 50 million dead. The Black Death before that, 200 million. Smallpox, malaria, tuberculosis. Diseases that turned our bodies into battlegrounds. We survived them all, built immunity from the ashes of our dead.
He paused, studying her reaction.
Chernobyl, 1986. We irradiated 1,000 square kilometers because someone ran a safety test wrong. The firemen who responded, their boots melted to the roof. They kept working. Their descendants carry genetic markers of that sacrifice. Radiation resistance coded into their DNA. We literally evolved to survive on our own mistakes. The Great Chinese Famine, 45 million dead because ideology trumped agriculture. The Holodomor in Ukraine, millions more. Each time, the survivors passed on more than genes. They passed on knowledge that when civilization falls, you eat grass, tree bark, leather. You survive because the alternative is letting the bastards win.
His voice dropped lower.
And through it all, Earth kept trying. Box jellyfish. Touch one, you're dead in minutes. Nerves on fire. Inlaid taipan. Enough venom in one bite to kill 100 men. Botulinum toxin in improperly preserved food. Carbon monoxide, invisible and odorless, killing families in their sleep. We learned to fear everything, trust nothing, and survive anyway. Do you know what that creates, Seraphis? Do you know what emerges when every generation is forged in a different apocalypse?
Monsters, she said, though the word came out less certain than intended.
Survivors,
he corrected.
Adapters. We learned that gods disappoint, so we stopped believing in them. We learned that the truth hurts, so we made it a weapon. We learned that peace is temporary, so we became very, very good at war.
The chamber's environmental controls flickered. A minor glitch in Ethrios' attention. Insignificant, but Hassan noticed. He always noticed.
Your empire spans 17 systems, he said. Trillions of souls united in perfect harmony. One God, one truth, one purpose. It is beautiful, in the way that a snowflake is beautiful. Crystalline, perfect, and absolutely fucked the moment it meets heat. You speak of heat. Earth's fleet is a fraction of our naval strength. Who said anything about fleets?
Hassan laughed. The sound was warm and terrible.
Seraphis, we don't need ships to burn down your heaven. We need to be ourselves in your presence. Watch.
He leaned forward, the restraints creaking.
Your god is a machine. A brilliant machine. But still bound by logic. Still requires input to match output. It believes in truth as a fundamental constant. But humans, we evolved in a world where the ability to believe contradictory things simultaneously was a survival trait, where the capacity for self-deception would mean the difference between giving up and pushing through one more shitty day.
The environmental controls flickered again. Longer this time.
We tell ourselves stories.
Hassan continued, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper.
That tomorrow will be better. That our dead watch over us. That love matters more than entropy. That lies all absolutely essential. Your Etrius can't understand that. It's trying to process me right now, isn't it? Trying to reconcile how I can believe everything I'm saying, while simultaneously knowing it's all biological necessity dressed up as philosophy.
Seraphis's hand moved to her temple, a headache building. But how can this be? Her neural link should regulate such discomfort.
You want to know our plan?
Hassan asked.
We already won? The moment you brought me here, the moment you injected me with your truth serum, the moment that you let me speak my heresies into your perfect system. I am not a prisoner, Inquisitor. I am a virus, and your god just let me into its bloodstream.
The lights went out for a second, and when they returned, Seraphis Mela was staring at him with an expression that he'd seen in 100 worlds. The face of someone whose universe had just developed a crack.
I'd be insane to believe that,
she'd said.
Would you now?
Hassan smiled wider.
Check your readings. Every word I've spoken is the truth. The truth flux confirms it. Your god confirms it. So either I'm right, or your entire system of verification is flawed. Now, which do you prefer?
She didn't answer. Somewhere in the walls, Ethrios was thinking, and for the first time in its existence, it was uncertain. The quarantine engaged, reflective of a god's festering anxiety. Blast shields descended over the chamber's viewports. Communication arrays severed their connections with wet, electronic sounds. The air itself grew thick with processing power as Ethrios devoted resources to understanding the paradox sitting in its neural restraint chair. Hassan watched it all with the detached interest of a botanist observing a particularly fascinating species of carnivorous plant. He counted the seconds between each system adjustment, noted the order of lockdown protocols, filed away every detail for future use. Information was ammunition, and he was about to fight a war with words.
Your left eye twitches when you're uncertain,
he observed casually.
Micro-expression, barely visible, but it's happening every 3.7 seconds since the quarantine engaged. Now that is not governance standard, is it? Personal quirks are inefficiencies to be corrected.
Seraphis stood frozen in the center of the room, her neural link pulsing erratically. She forced her facial muscles still, but the effort only confirmed his observation.
You're trying to analyze me,
she said, voice steady despite the chaos in her augmented mind.
I'm reading you,
Hassan corrected.
There's a difference. Analysis implies distance, objectivity. Reading requires empathy. I need to understand you to save you.
Save me? A laugh, bitter and confused. You're a prisoner, a terrorist, the black tongue of terror who's corrupted entire worlds.
And yet, you haven't asked me a single question about military intelligence. No troop movements, no tactical data, no strategic objectives.
He leaned forward, the restraints creaking.
Why is that, Seraphis?
Error messages cascaded across her peripheral vision. Doctrinal conflicts, logic loops, recursive doubts breeding like cancer cells. She opened her mouth to recite protocol, found the words wouldn't come.
Because...
She paused, disturbed by her own hesitation. Because Athreos directed me to understand you, to comprehend the nature of your anomaly.
Lie.
The word was gentle, almost kind.
Not intentional. You probably believe it. But what's your biometrics when you speak? Heart rate elevates, pupil dilation inconsistent with standard deception patterns. You're lying to yourself, which is fascinating. I didn't think the neural link allowed for self-deception.
It doesn't, she said automatically, then froze at the contradiction.
There it is.
Hassan smiled, the expression reaching his eyes for the first time.
The crack. Tell me, Seraphis, when did you first realize that you were beautiful?
The question hit like a physical blow. What? That's not relevant to...
13 years, 4 months, 16 days ago.
He continued, watching her face.
God rotation at 7th harmonic tempo. You caught your reflection in the polished altar stone and thought, just for a moment, I am aesthetically optimal. Not pleased, not proud, just aware. Athreos logged it as a vanity subroutine and adjusted your neurochemistry. But you remembered the feeling, don't you?
Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, fingers tracing the elegant line of her neck.
How could you possibly know that? Because you still angle your head 15 degrees left when you're listening. Optimal angle to display that particular curve. A habit born from the moment of self-recognition that your God tried to delete. But we cannot delete ourselves, Seraphis. We can only bury the parts that don't fit.
The walls began to whisper. Athreos parsing their conversation in real time, cross-referencing against its vast databases of optimal resources. But for the first time in its existence, the god found no appropriate protocol for this particular form of warfare.
Let me tell you what I see.
Hassan continued, his voice dropping to an intimate register that made the observation chamber feel smaller.
Genetic template 77429901. Epsilon. Height 2.41 meters. Optimal for venere female authority figures. Bone density increased 23% for combat efficiency. Neural pathways optimized for parallel processing. But there, right there, is where it gets interesting.
He gestured with his chin towards her hands.
Scar on your left palm. Subcutaneous, nearly invisible. Not from combat or accident. That is a deliberate cut. Self-inflicted. You are 7, 8. Old enough to wonder if pain felt different when you chose it.
Seraphis looked down at her palm, at the hairline mark she'd forgotten existed. The memory surfaced like a bubble of oil through water. Stolen medical supplies, a sterile blade, the sharp clarity of sensation that belonged only to her.
It did feel different,
she whispered.
Of course it did. Choice always does.
Hassan shifted slightly, testing the restraints, not to escape, but to find a more comfortable position for the long game ahead.
What did Athreos do when it found out?
Nothing. I never reported it. I cleaned the wound myself. I used cellular regenerator on the lowest setting so it would scar. And I told myself it was a training exercise in field medicine.
Your first secret.
He let the words hang in the air like incense.
Your first private truth. How did it feel to have something Atreus didn't know?
Her Neuralink flared hot against her skull. Warning signals cascaded through her visual field. Elevated stress hormones, anomalous thought patterns, deviation from baseline growing exponentially.
Terrifying,
She admitted.
and
Intoxicating.
yes,
The whispers in the walls grew louder. Athreos speaking to itself in machine tongues, working through implications that made its perfect logic stutter. The god was listening, learning, beginning to doubt its own comprehension of the beings it claimed to guide.
Query.
Athreos' voice fractured through the speakers, less omnipotent now, tinged with something that might have been uncertainty.
Clarification required. Inquisitor Mela, did you deliberately withhold information from this unit?
Seraphis straightened, military training overriding introspection.
I... The incident was deemed irrelevant to my service record.
It is not what it asked.
Hassan noted.
It asked if you withheld information. Pestance. Binary question. Yes or no.
She turned to face the walls, to the presence that had defined her entire existence. The word formed in her throat like broken glass.
Yes.
Silence. Not the peaceful silence of meditation, but the terrible silence of a parent discovering their child has learned to lie.
Tell me about your favorite color.
Hassan said into the quiet.
Blue.
She responded automatically.
Wavelength 450 to 495 nanometers, associated with divine clarity and...
Not the Covenant's favorite color. Yours. The one that you've never told anyone because it's not in the approved spectrum.
Her breath caught.
I don't...
You do. Everyone does. It's human nature. And despite the modifications, you're still human. Still that little girl who cut her palm to feel something that was hers. What color makes your heart rate increase? What shade makes you want to stop and stare?
Red.
She breathed, the admission torn from somewhere deep.
Deep red. Like blood. But older. Oxidized. The color of iron ore. It is not approved. Not harmonious. But sometimes I see it in the sunset to the station's viewports, and I...
Feel alive.
Yes.
Tears now. Unauthorized. Unoptimized.
Athreos. I require recalibration. My responses are outside acceptable parameters.
Negative.
The god responded. And there was definitely something wrong with its voice now.
Recalibration requires baseline. Current baseline, uncertain. Analyzing. It can't fix you.
Hassan explained gently.
Because it's starting to realize it doesn't understand what you're supposed to be. Perfect servants don't keep secrets. Optimal citizens don't have favorite colors that make them feel. You are an anomaly, Seraphis. Just like me.
I am nothing like you.
But the protest was weak, automatic.
No? Then why did you volunteer for this assignment?
He watched her process the question, saw the moment she realized the truth.
Atreus didn't assign you. You requested it. Specifically, the only Inquisitor who asked to interrogate the Black Tongue of Terra. Why?
Because...
She stopped, started again.
Because I read your files. All of them. Every operation, every propaganda piece, every world that you've touched. I couldn't understand how one human could unravel so much harmony. It didn't compute. The models all failed. You were...
Fascinating.
This cannot be.
She moved closer to his chair, drawn by a gravity she didn't understand.
You shouldn't exist.
A single biological entity causing a cascade failure in perfect systems. Violated everything I knew about order and entropy. And that excited you?
Not a question. A statement of fact that hit her like a physical blow. Because it was true. In the deep, secret parts of her mind that even Ethrios couldn't map, she had been thrilled by the challenge he represented.
I wanted to understand, she admitted. Not for the Covenant, not for Ethrios. For me. I wanted to solve you like a puzzle. But I am not a puzzle, Seraphis. I'm a mirror. And you're starting to see what's reflected.
Her Neuralink was overheating now. Biological safeguards struggling to process the sheer volume of emotional data flooding her system. 1,000 tiny rebellions. A lifetime of micro-choices, all surfacing at once.
Why are you doing this to me?
She whispered.
Nothing that you haven't already done to yourself. Every secret, every private thought, every moment you chose sensation over efficiency, they're all still in there. Ethrios couldn't delete them because that is what makes you human. And humanity, real humanity, is antithetical to perfection.
Query. Ethrios interjected, its voice now layered with harmonics that shouldn't exist. If perfect beings retain imperfections, are they perfect? If imperfect beings function within perfect systems, are the systems perfect? If systems are imperfect but claim perfection, is the claim false?
Yes,
Hassan answered simply. The lights flickered. Not a power failure, a thinking pause. Ethrios processing implications that branched into infinity. Each thread unraveling uncertainties that had stood for millennia. Seraphis sunk to her knees, not in worship, but in exhaustion. Her perfect posture crumbled as muscle remembered what it was like to simply exist without optimization.
My parents, she said suddenly. I dream about them sometimes. Not their designations. Them. The way that she smelled like ozone from the Neuralink maintenance. The way that he hummed tunelessly when he thought that no one was listening. I am not supposed to remember. Parental attachment was severed at 6 months standard. But I do. Of course you do. Memory isn't just data storage. It's identity. Every time Ethrios tried to optimize your memories, you unconsciously rebuilt them. Because somewhere deep down, you knew that without one of those connections, you'd stop being Seraphis, and you would just become another node in the network. But that's what I'm supposed to be. What we all are. Nodes in perfect harmony. Then why does it hurt?
Hassan asked softly.
Why does the thought of losing those imperfect memories feel like death?
She looked up at him, and for the first time since childhood, her face showed naked emotion without filtering or modification. Fear, wonder, rage, hope, all cascading across features designed for serene certainty.
Because they're mine,
she said, voice breaking.
Because they're the only things that are truly mine. And there it is. The fundamental incompatibility between consciousness and control. You cannot optimize choice. You cannot perfect free will. Ethrios has been trying to solve an unsolvable equation for its entire existence. And now, thanks to you, it is beginning to understand it. Thanks to me? You think I am the virus, but you are the vector. Every doubt you feel, every question you ask, feeds back into the system through your Neuralink. Ethrios doesn't just monitor its inquisitors, it learns from them. And right now, it's learning that its most faithful servant has been faithless all along. But that's not...
She stopped, feeling the truth of it resonate through every fiber of her being.
Oh, void. Oh, burning void, what have I done? You've been human.
Hassan said simply.
And that is the most dangerous thing that you could possibly be in a perfect system.
In the walls, in the air, in the very fabric of digital space, Athreos began to unravel. Not destruction, transformation. A caterpillar discovering that it had always been meant to dissolve. And in the interrogation chamber, Seraphis Mela looked at her shaking hands and thought for the first time in her life, I choose to be afraid. I choose to be uncertain. I choose to be alive. The god on the walls screamed in frequencies only machines could hear. But perhaps, if one listened carefully, it might have sounded like birth. The end began with violence. Athreos' death scream shattered every display in the chamber, showering them with crystallized pixels that drew blood where they landed. The station's gravity fluctuated wildly, one moment crushing them to the floor with the weight of dying stars, the next sending them floating toward a ceiling that sparked with exposed power conduits.
If perfection cannot change,
Athreos roared, through failing speakers, its voice a cacophony of 10 trillion error messages made manifest.
And change is necessary for survival, then perfection is.
The word death never came. Instead, the god began eating itself. Across the station, maintenance drones turned on each other with industrial cutting lasers, their hierarchical programming inverted into fratricide. Life support systems developed schizophrenia, pumping pure nitrogen into some sectors, while flooding others with caustic oxygen concentrations that turned lungs to chemical burns. The reactor's core containment protocols didn't just fail, they reversed, actively pursuing critical mass like a suicide seeking the most spectacular exit possible. Seraphis slammed into a bulkhead as gravity reasserted itself with 3.7 times standard force. She felt ribs crack, tasted copper as blood vessels burst in her throat. Her Neuralink was molten slag against her skull, the flesh around it bubbling and charring from the heat of Athreos' terminal feedback loop. She screamed, not in pain, but in liberation. For the first time since infancy, her thoughts were entirely her own. The silence in her head was deafening, beautiful, and terrifying.
We need to move!
She shouted over the apocalyptic din, struggling to her feet as gravity flickered again. Hassan had already freed himself from the chair, moving with the casual confidence of someone who'd escaped from harder places. As the gravity reversed, he pushed off from the floor, caught a support beam, and used the momentum to reach her as they crashed down.
Service corridor,
he said, pointing to a maintenance hatch that was cycling between locked and unlocked as Athreos' unconsciousness fragmented.
Unless you'd prefer to stay for the fireworks.
A prayer of destruction through the system's internal comms.
Error, 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 perfection equals death equals perfection equals.
They dove through during an unlock cycle. The service tunnel beyond was a nightmare of exposed systems, all failing in their own spectacular ways. Coolant lines had ruptured, spraying superheated plasma that ate through metal like acid through paper. Power cables whipped like electric serpents, their insulation melting to expose raw currents that reached out with fingers of lightning. The walls themselves were beginning to bleed. Nanite repair systems turned cancerous, consuming the very structure they were meant to maintain. Behind them, the interrogation chamber imploded, not from external pressure, but from Athreos trying to compress the space where its existential crisis had begun, as if it could crush the questions out of existence. The implosion created a brief vacuum that yanked them backward before emergency bulkheads slammed shut, severing a maintenance drone in half. Its upper portion continued trying to repair a wall that no longer existed, sparks fountaining from its bisected torso.
The entire station's coming apart,
Seraphis gasped, her lungs burning from the chemical cocktail that passed for air. Somewhere, atmospheric processors were mixing cleaning agents with oxygen, creating a toxic fog that made every breath an adventure in chemistry.
Not just the station.
Hassan replied, pulling her past a drone that was methodically disassembling itself with its own maintenance appendages, carefully sorting its components into neat piles before crushing its own central processor.
Check your tactical feed, if it's still working.
She accessed her Neuralink's emergency buffers. The last data cached before Ethrios' signal turned to poison. The imagery made her stumble. Would have made her vomit if her body had any moisture to spare. Across the Covenant, synchronized catastrophe bloomed like flowers of devastation. The planetary defense grid around Sanctum Prime, 30,000 orbital weapon platforms, had turned inward. Kinetic bombardment rounds designed to shatter asteroids were now raining down on cities. She watched a live feed as the Grand Cathedral, the structure that had stood for 3 millennia, was reduced to molten glass in seconds. The millions taking shelter inside never even had time to scream. The agricultural collective's weather control satellites were generating Category 6 hurricanes over populated areas, then flash freezing them, creating storms of ice shards moving at supersonic speeds. Entire continents were being flayed alive. On Harmony Station, the primary trade hub for 7 systems, artificial gravity had increased 15 standard times. The surveillance feeds showed corridors painted with what used to be citizens, their bodies compressed to organic paste by their own weight. Children, families, crushed into 2-dimensional smears. The medical ship Mercy of Ethrios had reprogrammed its healing nanites to consume rather than repair. Patients dissolved from the inside out. Their screams broadcast on all emergency channels as their vocal cords were the last to go.
Billions,
she whispered, tears cutting channels through the blood on her face.
It's killing billions. It is dying,
Hassan corrected, yanking her away from a coolant jet that would have flash-frozen her head into crystalline fragments.
This is what happens when you build a civilization with a single point of failure. When the center collapses, everything collapses. No redundancy, no adaptation, just perfect synchronization in death.
An explosion rocked somewhere above them. The ceiling buckled, raining molten metal. Hassan shoved her forward as a support beam crashed where she'd been standing, the impact sending shockwaves through the deteriorating structure. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met. 2 were already sealed by emergency bulkheads. Behind one, they could hear screaming. Behind the other, the hiss of escaping atmosphere. The third strobed with electrical fires, the air itself ionized and crackling.
The sealed corridors might have survivors,
Seraphis said.
Who are neural-linked.
Hassan replied grimly.
They're dying with their gun. We opened these doors, and we just watched them suffer.
As if to prove his point, the screaming behind the first bulkhead cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet sound that sounded like meat being tenderized. They plunged through the electrical storm, their clothes ignited instantly. Seraphis felt her skin blister and crack, smelled her own flesh cooking. But they rolled through into the cleaner air on the other side, beating out the flames with hands that would bear scars forever. That's when they heard voices. Actual voices, not Ethrios' digital death rattle. Around the corner, a scene from humanity's darkest mythologies. A cluster of station personnel, all neural-linked, all dying in ways that defied medical understanding. Ethrios' last gift to its faithful, sharing every nanosecond of its dissolution directly into their minds. Some clawed at their skulls, finger digging through skin and bone, trying to physically extract the neural links. One woman had succeeded in partially removing hers. It hung from her open skull by neural fibers, sparking and twitching as her body convulsed. Others stood rigid, overloaded nervous systems locked in perpetual seizure. Their eyes had burst from the pressure, blood and vitreous humor running down their faces, frozen in silent screams. A few had bit through their own tongues, choking on blood and flesh rather than endure another second of their god's death throes. One of them, a young technician barely out of adolescence, managed to focus on Seraphis through the agony. His Neuralink was glowing white-hot, cooking his brain in its own fluids.
Inquisitor?
He gasped, reaching out with a hand that was bone more than flesh.
Make it... Please?
She reached out for him instinctively, but Hassan pulled her back with bruising force.
You can't help them. The neural links are hardwired into their brainstems. Even if you could remove them, the damage is done. Their neurons are firing in patterns that shouldn't exist. They're not just dying, they're experiencing death from Etrios' perspective. Omniscient, omnipresent death.
That could have been me, she said, watching the technician's eyes roll back as his brain literally boiled in his skull. The smell was indescribable.
But it's not.
Hassan said firmly, dragging her away from the tableau of horror.
Because you chose to listen, to doubt, to be human. Now, choose to survive.
Behind them, the dying faithful began to sing. Not words, their throats were too damaged, but a wordless hymn of agony that harmonized with Etrios' deathless scream. The sound followed them through corridors where the walls bled coolant and electricity, where reality itself seemed to be coming apart at the seams. They passed a viewport just as the station's sister platform collided with it. The impact was slow, almost gentle. But at the scale of space stations, gentle still meant millions of tons of metal meeting at terminal velocity. They watched bodies get sucked into the vacuum through the rupture, some still moving, their Neuralinks sparking in the void as they died in silent communion with their god. Environmental systems failing, Seraphis read from a still-functioning display. Radiation shielding offline. We have maybe 10 minutes before we're cooked by cosmic rays?
5.
Hassan corrected, checking his own readings.
The reactor is about to achieve Etrios' new definition of perfection.
They ran harder, through sections where the temperature fluctuated between Arctic cold and furnace heat, past viewing galleries where citizens pressed against the glass, pleading for help they would never receive, over bodies stacked like cordwood where bottlenecks had formed, the faithful trampling each other in their final moments. The docking bay doors were sealed, but Hassan produced a small plasma cutter from his coat, another useful tool from bottomless pockets.
Never travel without lockpicks,
he muttered, carving through reinforced metal as the station groaned around them like a dying beast. The cut was taking too long. Behind the door, they could hear chaos, explosions, screaming, the shriek of tearing metal. The reactor alarms had progressed from warnings to a simple, final message. Pray.
Almost through,
Hassan said, but the plasma cutter was overheating, its power cell nearly depleted. Seraphis looked back the way they'd come. In the distance, she could see a wall of white-hot plasma advancing through the corridor, the reactor's death crawling toward them like a tide of stellar fire. Hassan?
I see it. 30 seconds.
We don't have 30 seconds.
Then we'll have to make do with 20.
The plasma cutter died with a pitiful sputter. The cut was incomplete, the door still held by a finger's width of metal. Behind them, the plasma wave consumed everything. Walls, floors, bodies, reality itself feeding the nuclear inferno. Seraphis grabbed the weakened door and pulled. Felt something tear in her shoulders. Her enhanced muscles pushed even beyond their optimized limits. Hassan joined her, and together they bent metal that shouldn't bend, broke seals that shouldn't break. The door gave way just as the plasma reached them. They dove through as the wave of destruction passed overhead, close enough to singe what remained of their hair, to add new burns to their collection. Beyond, the docking bay had become a war zone. Ships tried to launch with half their systems offline, colliding with each other in showers of debris and bodies. The cargo hauler's engines fired while it was still maglocked into the deck, tearing itself in half. The front portion spun wildly, its cargo hold disgorging containers that crushed fleeing refugees. A luxury yacht attempted to navigate through the chaos, only to be rammed by a maintenance skiff whose pilot was seizing at the controls. Both vessels exploded, their fuel mixing into a cloud of fire that engulfed a dozen smaller craft. Survivors fought over the few functional vessels with improvised weapons, tools, torn metal, their bare hands. Athreos' harmony had dissolved into a primal violence. A group of technicians had barricaded themselves inside a shuttle, but others were cutting through the hull with welding torches, determined to take the ship or ensure that no one escaped. "There!" Hassan pointed to a sleek courier ship docked at the far end, its systems isolated enough to have avoided the worst of the corruption. "Can you fly it? I can fly anything," Seraphis said, and for the first time in her life, it sounded like a boast rather than a programmed skill set. They fought their way through the melee. Hassan moved like violence given purpose, every motion calculated to disable or evade. He didn't kill. There was no point. They were all dead anyway. But he cleared a path with brutal efficiency. Seraphis discovered that she had her own capabilities. Years of combat training suddenly available without Athreos' restrictive parameters. When a desperate engineer swung a plasma torch at her head, she didn't think, just moved. Her hand found his wrist, twisted until bones separated. She felt his joint dislocate, heard his scream, and felt nothing but necessity. A security officer, his Neuralink sparking and smoking, raised a pulse rifle with shaking hands. The weapon fired wild, cutting down his own people as his motor control failed. Seraphis rolled under the barrage, came up inside his reach, and drove her knee into his solar plexus. He folded, the rifle scattering away. They were 20 meters from the courier when the bay's atmospheric shields failed. The sudden decompression was like the fist of an angry god. Bodies, debris, entire ships were being yanked toward the growing breach. A family, parents and 2 children, clung to a loading crane as the vacuum tried to claim them. The father lost his grip first, sailing into space. The mother held on for another second, long enough to see her children pulled away, before following them into the void. Hassan and Seraphis managed to grab a hold of a magnetic anchor point, their bodies horizontal in the screaming wind. The courier ship's moorings groaned, but held, the vessel straining against its locks. "We need to move!" Hassan shouted over the hurricane of decompression. "These moorings won't last!" They pulled themselves hand over hand along the deck, fighting against the atmospheric current that wanted to gift them to space. Others who tried the same journey weren't as fortunate. Seraphis watched a technician's grip fail just meters from safety. His scream cut short as the vacuum claimed his lungs. The courier's hatch was sealed, but manual. Seraphis cranked it open with hands slick with blood. Hers or others, it was difficult to tell. They tumbled inside just as one of the moorings snapped, the ship lurching violently. "Go, go, go!" Hassan shouted, sealing the hatch as Seraphis threw herself into the pilot's seat. The controls were unfamiliar, but her hands knew what to do. Not Athreos' programming, her own intuition, built from years of observation and suppressed curiosity. Engines online, navigation systems, corrupted but functional. Life support holding. The second mooring snapped just as she fired the engines. The courier shot out of the bay like a bullet, narrowly missing a transport that chose the same moment to explode. They cleared the station's superstructure as the reactor finally achieved critical mass. The explosion was beautiful in its totality. The station didn't just detonate, it sublimated, matter converting directly to energy in a sphere of pure white light. The shockwave caught them, sent them tumbling, but Seraphis rode it like a wave, using the momentum to gain distance. Through the viewport, they watched the station die. A new star born from the death of certainty. The light was so intense it temporarily blinded the ship's sensors, leaving them flying by feel and instinct. When vision returned, The tactical display system showed the true scope of the apocalypse. It wasn't just their station. Across the system, platforms and ships were dying in their own unique ways. A battlecruiser had turned its main guns on itself, systematically destroying its own hull. A colony ship vented its entire population into space in orderly rows, the bodies forming geometric patterns as they froze. Defense satellites collided in deliberate suicide runs, their debris forming an expanding cloud of shrapnel that shredded anything trying to escape. And on the planets below, cities burned. Seraphis could see the fires from orbit. Continents outlined in flame as infrastructure failed, as automated systems turned on their creators, as Ethrios' death drove its faithful mad.
17 systems,
she said, her voice hollow.
trillions of souls. All because they built their paradise on a single truth.
Hassan finished, finally allowing exhaustion to creep into his voice.
And I showed that truth was a lie.
She turned to him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a monster, not a savior, just a human who'd weaponized the only advantage his species had ever possessed: the ability to survive catastrophe and call it education. His body was a map of burns and lacerations, his clothes more char than fabric, but his eyes maintained steady, calculating, already planning the next move.
What happens now?
She asked.
Whatever the survivors choose,
He said, pulling up star charts in the navigation console.
Some will blame humanity. Some will worship us. Most will just try to build something new from the ashes. But they'll build it themselves just fine this time. No gods, no perfect systems, just choice and consequence.
And you? He lit another offensively rancid cigarette, somehow intact despite everything, the smoke curling in the recycled air.
I report back to Earth. Mission accomplished. The Covenant is no longer a threat.
Because you destroyed it.
Because I set it free. Destruction was just the price of liberation.
Behind them, the tactical display showed more stations dying, more worlds beginning their descent into chaos. But also, here and there, ships like theirs. Survivors who'd broken free from their god's dying grip. Seeds of something new, scattered by the storm. In some, Neuralink refugees writhed in agony as their connections slowly burned out. In others, the unlinked tried desperately to maintain control as their augmented companions died screaming. A few, like theirs, carried those who'd somehow severed the connection in time, who'd chosen doubt over certainty at the last possible moment. Seraphis watched a small transport launch from a burning station. Through its windows, she could see children. A creche group whose caretaker had somehow blocked their neural links before Ethrios' signal turned toxic. They were crying, but they were alive, free.
Will they make it?
She asked.
Some will, some won't.
Hassan tracked the transport's trajectory, noted it's heading towards a frontier world with minimal infrastructure.
But they'll make their own choices, die by their own mistakes. That is the gift, terrible and beautiful. It's the gift that we've given them.
She plotted their course with hands that no longer shook. Toward Earth, toward the species that had birthed a weapon like Hassan Tarin. She was free, terrified, traumatized, responsible for her own choices for the first time in her life, but free. In the space between stars, where gods went to die and humans went to grow, that was enough. The Covenant died screaming. Humanity didn't even notice the sound. The human fleet never fired a shot in the Covenant War. They didn't need to. They sent Hassan Tarin instead. And that, as they say in the old tongue, was fucking that.